So Ethiopia, officially the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, has been at the center of world news since the conflict erupted in the Tigray region a year ago. This week's arrest of two prominent scholars in Addis Ababa has lent credence to allegations that the government in Ethiopia is engaged in a crackdown against ethnic Tigrayans. Billene Seyoum is the press secretary of Prime Minister Abey Ahmed and joins us for insight into what is being done to halt conflict in the country. Ms. Billene Seyoum, thank you very much for your time and agreeing to speak to us this morning. Perhaps a bit of context as to how we got here.
Thank you very much, Dudu, for having me and for enabling me to give a little bit of context to what's going on. At the outset, I need to share with you and your viewers that while over the past year the government has been responding to a war waged on the state by the TPLF, which is an insurgent armed group designated as a terrorist organization, it has also lately become evident that many external factors and actors that are utilizing this conflict as an entry point for another agenda have also, in a way, hijacked it. So we also have credible intelligence that the TPLF is being provided with satellite information and being supported. And this, in particular, should concern the African continent in its entirety. It should concern Africans everywhere when Ethiopia, an ancient civilization that has been an icon of freedom and inspiration for independent movements throughout the continent, is being pressured from all directions simply for fighting to preserve its territorial integrity. And this misplaced pressure being applied on the Ethiopian government and the state is giving leverage to insurgent groups and emboldening them, which is really an antithesis to championing democratic principles when insurgent groups are being handed, if you could say, a green card and an applause for their destabilizing efforts. So I just want to use this opportunity to really reiterate to all Africans that they would need to watch this closely and help take back the narrative because it is a narrative that is quite filled with a lot of disinformation. And this is an African issue because the stability and territorial integrity of Ethiopia is key for all African nations, and standing with Ethiopia today is standing for the future of Africa.
You speak, ma'am, of a hidden force that you suggest is at play in terms of bolstering the TPLF and their efforts. Some have argued that this is an ethnic war. Is this something that you would agree to, firstly? And secondly, according to your intelligence, who could have a hand in this and what would their interest be?
So the characterization of this as an ethnic war or quote-unquote an ethnic cleansing project that is being undertaken is really part of the disinformation propaganda that is being orchestrated around how the government is dealing with this insurrection. For a lot of people, what is happening in Ethiopia is only coming into perspective and into view as of last year, the beginning of the conflict, when the TPLF attacked the northern command of the National Defense Forces. Yet the context is much deeper than that, because the TPLF, which now on international media spaces is being depicted as a victim, was a brutal, tyrannical regime that ruled Ethiopia for 27 years, where vast human rights abuses, corruption, and so many, unethical things had been taking place. So this group that, with the new administration coming into place in 2018 through a transitional process, wants to regain the upper hand again, and they have ethnicized this issue because the TPLF, by its formation and how they were formed back in the 1970s, is based along ethnic lines. And one of the things that they did is when they came into power in the early 90s, they pushed for an ethnic federation, so dividing Ethiopia along ethnic identity cleavages. And now they are crying foul and saying that the government is attacking or profiling ethnicities, which is absolutely not true, because the crackdown and trying to apprehend, or the government's efforts to apprehend criminals, is targeted at the TPLF, which is the Tigray People's Liberation Front, which is designated as a terrorist organization according to the laws of the land.
Ms. Billene, so you speak of misplaced pressure on Ethiopia. Reports suggest that there is a UN report as well as an Ethiopian Human Rights Commission report that has been published speaking of both sides in the conflict having committed human rights violations, including torturing civilians, committing gang rapes and arresting people based on ethnicity. On the part of the Ethiopian government, from what you have said, it would seem that this is a defense strategy to protect the nation as well. Is there something to be said, though, with regards to violations by some of government officials?
Indeed, and if you have noted when that report did come out, and even prior to that report, on several occasions the federal government of Ethiopia has made it clear that indeed there are some outliers within the security apparatus that may have done some acts that are outside of the principles and the code of conduct in which they're supposed to engage. And it is with that commitment to apprehend these individuals and bring them to justice that the Ethiopian government enabled for not only the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, but also the UN body investigating these criminal activities to come and investigate on the ground. And the report that you mentioned is a product of that commitment on behalf of the federal government. So when that report was issued, one of the clear statements that came from the Prime Minister, again ensuring his commitment, is that those that are suspected and that have been identified in terms of doing these kind of criminal activities will be brought to justice. Those on the civilian side through the national court system, and then those on the military side through a military court process. And in fact, the Prime Minister has also set up a committee which he had made public as well following this report that comprises different government entities that are responsible for the issue to look at mechanisms of redress for victims of these human rights abuses and allegations of abuse that came up and surfaced in the report.
So, ma'am, at this hour, what can you tell us? We understand that the country is in a state of emergency. Is that still holding? As well as how far TPLF forces are from reaching the capital. We understand that, we've been reporting in the past week or so that they're progressing towards Addis Ababa. What is the situation at this hour?
So part of the disinformation campaign that I was telling you earlier was this, clear and present danger that Addis Ababa was being encircled. And this was about 3 weeks ago, where, what were once considered reputable media organizations like CNN had created hysteria around what was happening, saying that, the TPLF had encircled Addis Ababa, utilizing imagery that they had taken from another part of the country a few months ago. So that is a very disingenuous attempt to create hysteria and alarmism where there is none. There are fronts in which the TPLF has opened a battle, and if you would note that while the altercation and the conflict began within the Tigray region, when the government enacted a unilateral humanitarian ceasefire, the TPLF described this as a sick joke and instead have been belligerent towards neighboring regions, the Afar and the Amhara regional governments, to be very specific. So they have been pillaging, they have been killing, they have been raping, and there's a lot of international the testimonies, reports, and documentations that are also confirming these reports and allegations from our side. Instead of backtracking and utilizing that opportunity that had been opened up as a way to create peace, the TPLF have further been emboldened by the silence, and there is a tendency within the international community to equalize an insurgent force that has taken up arms against a democratically elected government, equalizing the two on the same platform instead of admonishing and condemning them and holding them accountable for these egregious human rights violations and abuses that no entity is holding them accountable for. But as of right now, Addis Ababa and its vicinities are peaceful, are engaging, are under high vigilance, obviously, because of the threat that has been publicly declared by this terrorist organization. The state of emergency is still in effect throughout the country, but the state of emergency has been put in place as a mechanism to safeguard the peace and stability of the Ethiopian people and the Ethiopian state from these kind of belligerence.
Ma'am, you speak of the attack that is coming towards rather a democratically elected government. Would you say that Ethiopia's sovereignty is being challenged here?
Indeed, Ethiopia's sovereignty is being challenged because, again, I refer it back to equalizing, the government with an insurgent group. I mean, the insurgent group might have been in power before, but there were clear processes and opportunities since the Prime Minister Abey Ahmed came into power and the new administration took the helm in 2018 that enabled an equal playing field for all political contestations. One of the clear reforms that had been made was opening up the political space, and in fact, that opening up of the political space was a huge problem for the TPLF, which having dominated the politics of the country, the economy of the country, and many aspects of the country for the 27 years in which they were in power, felt threatened that, by bringing a lot of groups and a lot of parties and regions that were treated on the periphery of Ethiopian politics and Ethiopian life to the center, the current administration was a threat to the TPLF, who has been used to or has felt entitled that they dictate the terms of where this country is going. So that is in a way not being challenged from other voices. So in that sense, there is a threat to the sovereignty of the state because the government right now is a democratically elected government having wide popular support throughout the country in the recently concluded elections. And in the first, I would say, democratic elections in Ethiopia's modern history, where millions of Ethiopians went out to vote late into the night, and many other actors, international as well as continental in particular actors, have also given testimony to the fact that this was a democratic process.
In enters the United Nations. As we understand it, 16 UN staffers were detained with their dependents. 6 have since been released by the government. What is their crime, and how would you characterize Ethiopia-UN relations?
So one thing that I want to share with you, Dudu, is the fact that individuals work within international organizations does not necessarily make them above reproach. We've shared this before. There are individuals who are working on noble causes within international organizations, and particularly supporting in Ethiopia. But there has also been instances when these kind of spaces and systems and institutions have been hijacked for other agendas as well. The information that I have actually in opposition to yours is that all of them have been released, and these are all Ethiopian nationals. So their case has been investigated, and the investigations are continuing, but they can do so from their homes. The commitment from the Ethiopian government to the UN is to provide the entity information on these local staff, which do not have diplomatic immunity, so would be treated under the laws of the land like any Ethiopian would be treated. But in terms of relations with the UN, it's business as usual. The UN Secretary General, for example, is in frequent contact and conversation with the Prime Minister. The resident coordinator is very cooperative and engaged on all issues in Ethiopia. So this particular incident where individuals have been identified for, or suspected for engaging in illegal activities is not going to be a blemish in these relations, because again, as a sovereign nation with its own laws, the security apparatus needs to undertake all investigations based on suspicions that are put forth.
Ms. Billene, you are bordered by Eritrea, Djibouti, Somalia, South Sudan, Sudan, Kenya. Geopolitically, what has this meant for the region?
I mean, Ethiopia has been a bastion of stability within the region, and it still continues to do that once it's thwarting of this threat. In fact, TPLF has been quite a threat to regional stability, and we know, how far the tentacles of the TPLF have worked to destabilize, a lot of the countries bordering Ethiopia during the TPLF's reign in the past, in the 27 years that they were in power. Nevertheless, in 2018, when Prime Minister Abey Ahmed came into the foreground, one of his clear priorities was on, enhancing relations and strengthening bilateral relations with all of these countries. And also pushing or championing forward an agenda of regional integration, regional economic integration as well, because there are so many things that unite us among all of these countries that are bordering Ethiopia. There's a lot of cultural and historical relevance, and the people need not be divided by politics. So part of his approach in the Meddamer ideology or philosophy, which is a philosophy of synergy, has been extended outside of the national borders to the regional aspect as well, championing for regional integration and working in harmony with our region. And this is something that he has also been pushing in the continent as well.
Addis Ababa is the seat where the African Union sits. Quite curious as to the level of engagement and what they have had to say with regards to what is happening in the country. What is that we have heard from them? What is it that we have heard from them, rather?
I mean, in terms of that, I think you would have to ask the African Union directly. But in terms of the Ethiopian government's engagement with the AU, rightly you have said that Addis Ababa is the seat of the African Union. It has been the seat of its predecessor, and Ethiopia is also one of the founders of the predecessor of the AU, which is the Organization for African Unity. The engagement is very strong, and in fact, Ethiopia encourages that any conversations that are happening are championed by the African Union or led by the African Union, because we strongly believe that Africans are capable of addressing our own issues at a continental level. Our culture, our heritage, the traditions that we espouse as a continent, which is something that is human-centered, is something that we can apply in this regard as well. And the African Union has positioned former, an older statesman, an elder, His Excellency Olusegun Obasanjo, as its envoy for the Horn. So he has been quite engaged in these issues, and the conversations do continue as well.
This has also stoked Ethiopian nationalism. Last week we were in conversation with Ms. Maya, who's an Ethiopian businesswoman, and she told us how Ethiopians have really rallied behind, efforts in the country to bring about peace. I guess finally for us, where to from here?
I mean, where to from here is important question that you're asking. This is a hiccup. This is not the end of, or this is not an event that marks the end of Ethiopia. This is a laborious process, and I think because Ethiopia had been an undemocratic country for so long, had been in the grips of tyranny and corruption, and not, maintaining or claiming its rightful place on the development agenda. The past 3 years have been a segue for that. They have been painful because obviously before the confrontation started by TPLF in November 3rd of last year, there were, overt and covert attempts to destabilize by using their agents, throughout the process of having relinquished control. So this struggle for the TPLF to try to come back in power is something that is being resisted nationally, from corner to corner. It is being resisted by Ethiopians in the diaspora. And in fact, today, I think you may have caught word, I think there's Ethiopians throughout the world who, under the leading campaign of No More, are saying no more to these kind of aggressions. And in fact, many other African nations are also joining on board. So where to from here is to ensure that, the continent takes back its narrative, that the country takes back the narrative, because there's a lot of misinformation, as we have seen in many other countries as well. Ethiopia is an entry point for sinister actions, and so this is why we reiterate again that African brothers and sisters throughout the continent need to be on guard and alert on what's happening, and really support their fellow compatriots within the country to overcome this turbulent period.
Billene Seyoum. I hope I said that correctly. Thank you very much. Time is an enemy, but we do appreciate you coming through to talk to us on the situation in Ethiopia. Ms. Billene Seyoum is the press secretary to the Ethiopian Prime Minister, Mr. Abey Ahmed. Let's come back.